Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Crone, Municipal World Executive Editor. A municipality's chief administrative officer is really the linchpin of the entire municipal corporation. The CAO is the principal advisor to the mayor and council. The CAO makes sure the mayor and council's priorities are put into action. They're responsible for the municipality's daily operations, and they are the point of contact for all of the rest of the municipality staff. And as more and more responsibilities are transferred to the municipal level of government, and municipalities are expected to do more and more, I think it's fair to say that the CAO is becoming more important than ever before. So, joining us now to talk about the key role of the municipal CAO is George Cuff. Now, George is a trusted municipal governance expert. He has been on the ground consulting with dozens and dozens of municipalities across Canada on governance issues. And he has translated that really real world knowledge into more than 450 articles and has written more than a dozen books. His most recent book is called The CAO. And of course, George is well known to Municipal World readers as our popular longtime columnist focusing on municipal governments. So, George, welcome. Great to see you.
Thanks, Greg. I'm delighted to be with you this morning.
Fantastic. So, let's get right to it. George, you've written extensively about municipal governance, as I mentioned. What inspired you to write this latest book?
Very good question, Greg. I thought about this for quite some time, and while I was writing my governance related books, much of what I say during those books is also related to the role of the Chief Administrative Officer, CAO across Canada, some places city managers. So I've spent a fair bit of my career trying to be focused around how do I ensure that councils are aware of the important role played by their CAO. How do I ensure that they retain the right person when they're doing recruitment? How do I ensure they follow the right recruitment practices? How do I ensure that they focus on the important elements of what a CAO does as opposed to being focused on all the frivolities that go along with the position? How do I ensure that department heads recognize that they report through a CAO to a council and that they don't bypass that important step? And how do I ensure that the CAOs that are laboring across Canada realize that they've got people like me and others that are interested in their success, but are often more frequently brought in when the council CAO relationship is in tatters and we're expected to either improve it or bury it. And so, while I tell people that part of my job is to provide good advice to CAOs, and while a lot of them would see me as being relatively friendly, there's also a number of those that would probably say that I've been very harsh in terms of my judgment because I've been the person that's written reports that have resulted in them finding a new location. So there, there's a whole lot of chapters into that sort of book. And when I thought about it, I thought I should write some of those chapters and get my messages across. So it's not in terms of an academic sense, but in terms of a lived world sense. I've been dealing with municipalities in all 10 provinces, all three territories. I've worked in all of them. I've done seminars in all of them. I've met CAOs in all of them, SAOs if you're talking about Northwest Territories and the Yukon, but CAOs in the rest of Canada. And I have, in my mind, devoted my career to how do I improve the lot of a council. And if I'm going to do that, I have to make sure that I've also improved the lot of a CAO.
Right. And as you mentioned, you've worked for countless municipalities. You've spoken to many, 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 many
Yeah.
CAOs. Is there something that jumps out at you as a common challenge to all of them? Despite, there's large municipalities, there's small municipalities, different provinces. But what's the one common challenge that they all face, all the CAOs?
I tell people that if it weren't for two words, my career would have never got off the ground. And the two words are role clarity.
Right.
And it's because, by and large, CAOs understand their role. They understand that they're expected to manage the departments down the organization, to set in place a structure and all of that. And I'll probably talk about that a bit more. But they're also recognize that their job is to advise councils and to make sure that the council is aware of its responsibilities. So when you look at sort of what's the challenge is how do you advise a council on its responsibility without inviting them into your realm as a CAO. And quite frankly, what happens with a lot of council members, they run because they want to quote manage City Hall. And whenever I hear that word, I cringe because I think, no, your job has nothing to do with managing City Hall. I recall writing an article for the Edmonton Journal during election season 4 or 8 years ago. And I wrote an article saying we don't need more managers, we need better leaders. Because people that were running for office were citing their backgrounds as project engineers. I recall one person doing that, landscape architects, social service workers, teachers, whatever. And I'm saying, no, the task at hand is to how do I provide good governance to the municipality. The CAO needs to understand that interface between council and management. They need to understand that if that's going to work, the CAO needs to protect those below and advise those above. And that means you've got to be able to maintain that separation, or you're going to have members of council dipping their hands into the administration to play with the trains, which is an expression used by managers. So you need to understand that this whole issue of role clarity is absolutely fundamentally important. There are other challenges which we may discuss, but that to me is absolutely principal. If you don't get off on the right footing with your new council coming in, which we're about to do here in Alberta very quickly, then you're in big trouble because council members are going to take your willingness to step aside as an invitation into how do they manage the corporation, and that's not what they're elected to do.
Right. Now, I imagine the audience for your book would be senior managers, the mayor and council, and CEOs themselves. So, what if are these people going to get from getting a hold of a copy of your book and actually reading it? What are they getting from it?
I think they'll get a better understanding of what's the history of the relationship. What's the evolution of that? And I say to people that history is important because if we don't understand it, we'll repeat it. And I think it's important to understand where did this all come from. I get nervous when I see provinces such as Ontario and British Columbia in the legislation that says a council may appoint a CAO. It's ridiculous. A council must appoint a CAO if you want to have good, solid council and administration relationships right across the country. So you need to have an awareness of what is going on administratively. You have to have an awareness of what's going on at the political level, and you have to ensure that you, as a manager, are doing your absolute best to advise the council on its responsibilities, to make sure that your orientation process is clear, to make sure that those responsibilities are clearly outlined, and then to defend the administration. If you've got problems with your department heads, you as the CAO have to deal with those yourself. You're not about to take those, I hope, up to council and expect council to make your administrative decisions. Smart CAOs, smart city managers understand they have a real responsibility to manage downward and advise up. And the ones that do it, in my mind, a first class job is to make sure that they ensure that that separation is there. Doesn't have to be so black and white as I might describe it, but they need to figure out how do we advise a council? How do I expose my department heads to a council, get them some experience, but at the same time ensure that they're respecting my role as a CAO.
Sounds great. Now, one thing I've noticed in the municipal sector is that there's a lot of churn. Like people are amongst the staff. So people are moving up, people are moving out. Somebody is assuming the role of CAO, never been a CAO before, or perhaps they're moving to a neighboring municipality and taking on the CAO role in another context. So given that, what would be your one piece of advice to someone who's new to the CAO role?
If I was a person starting off now and I had come through perhaps a department head route or an outside the organization route, say from a not for profit, I would start off in a smaller community of under 5,000 population. There's
Hmm.
often more challenge to those than there is to large municipalities, by the way, because you're called on to do virtually everything. And you get a good understanding of the grassroots of how local government functions. And I think that that's critically important for a municipality to have a CAO that understands what's going on below the CAO in the organization. You're going to have the same CAO if they're somewhat young. They're going to look for a larger community. They watch what's happening in the municipal marketplace. They apply for jobs with somewhat larger community, which might be next door, so they can continue to live where they are. They know that there's a personal upheaval that goes on because of their desire to progress, and progress typically means larger community, larger urban, larger rural. You can sometimes find that within a particular area, but often you have to move to enjoy that kind of elevation of your career. And so you'll see CAOs moving across Canada, and they're generally speaking they're quite portable. What's happened over the last decade or so, in my mind, has been CAOs who are more content with the location that they're in, and they're either trying to stay at the same location or they're prepared to move but not very far so they can maintain their same residence. They're raising
Mm,
children, they're involved in school systems and sports and so on. They've got a significant other who's involved in their own career, and CAOs are much more stay at home kind of people than when I first got into this local government business. So I think you'll see the evolution. The churn is also as a result of some people get into the role of CAO and they're in over their heads, and the council quickly realizes that, and they either manipulate the CAO until the person resigns, or they're looking to people like me to come in and review the organization when they know the principal problem is the relationship between council and CAO. Sometimes they're afraid to deal with that. Sometimes they don't know how to deal with that. In some places, they don't do performance reviews, which should be fundamental. There's a whole series of things that goes into that. But the churn in many ways is sometimes that's healthy because you're bringing in new blood, and sometimes it's not because you're moving out people who simply need another location. They don't need another profession.
mm. Interesting. Great advice. So we're close to wrapping up now, but my final question for you, George, is why should every municipal leader, whether manager, mayor and council, CAO, why would they really want to have your book, The CAO, in their professional library?
Yeah, if I'm a CAO, and I say this with both immodesty as well as bias, if I'm a CAO, I would buy the book to say, this guy named Cuff has been around the park longer than the rest of us. He's done work in more communities than the rest of us will ever think of, and he's got access to people's minds that he quotes in the book. He's got 12 or 15 sources in the book, people that have either been a CAO, are currently a CAO, or have consulted to CAOs. This book will contain a lot of good nuggets that any either new CAO or somebody that's been in the field for a while wants to be refreshed in terms of how do other CAOs approach their role. I think this is an excellent book in terms of a good source material for CAOs. I would argue that every municipal office should have the book, the CAO, and the one called the Mayor. And I could identify others. One called Leading is another really good one. That should be on the desk of every new mayor coming in. They should understand their role as mayor. They should understand the role of the CAO and obviously the role of the council as a whole. If we had those roles better outlined during the first 2 to 3 weeks of an elected official's term, you'd have far less churn, the word that you used earlier with regard to CEOs. Well, there's a lot of churn that goes on with councils. Been called in
Mhm.
with councils are absolutely off the tracks. I've done some of that work here in Alberta, some in British Columbia recently. Where mayors and councils are at each other's throats because they don't understand the fundamentals of the role, and they get involved in personality politics rather than issue-driven politics. And so a CAO needs to understand what's going on in their own world, what have other CAOs experienced, and why is that advice good for me in terms of my career, my profession.
Okay, fantastic. Well, George, we're going to wrap up now. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And thanks for all your efforts, not only writing for a municipal world, but for going across Canada and working with all these municipalities and helping to strengthen of what local governments does. So thank you for that. The book is The CAO by George Cuff. It's available on the Municipal World website. And until next time, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.